Today we have David Aronson, Senior Communications Advisor of ILRI, International Livestock Research Institute. So David, can you give us a little bit of background information of what you did before you got into ILRI?
I've been at ILRI for about a year. Before that, I spent about a year and a half in Kinshasa, Congo, working on a USAID-funded health project. But then before that, I spent about 20 years in DC, working for various think tanks and advocacy groups focused on both international and what for the United States was domestic policy issues, specifically immigration and race. So I worked for the Migration Policy Institute and I worked for the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, but I also worked for the Carnegie Endowment and for the U.S. Institute of Peace, so I've been around. But I do have some background in Africa. I grew up, my father was an anthropologist, so I grew up in Nigeria and have very fond memories of playing soccer during recess at the Ibadan, University School, or I think it was called. And then also spent some time in Cote d'Ivoire as well. So.
Interesting. So ILRI is known for the research institute when it comes to livestock. Can you tell us more about the projects you've done in Africa?
Sure. Well, ILRI, first of all, is one of 15, they're called CGIAR institutes. And these were institutes set up beginning in the 1950s and 60s to focus on food production in the developing world. And they were sort of set up in the wake of the big success of Nolan Borlaug and the Green Revolution in Asia. And the idea was, population in these countries continues to grow. How are we going to feed all of these people? And so ILRI was set up, and it has a joint institute. It's I think the only one of the 15 institutes that has two campuses, one here in Nairobi and the other in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. But we're the only one that focuses pretty much exclusively on livestock. So our focus is on how to improve the productivity of animals, how to fight diseases, how to use animals to help the well-being of, for example, women. We have pure, what we think of as pure scientists, biologists and microbiologists, but we also have social scientists and economists and anthropologists and so on.
So one of the projects, I think I read something about it, it's about the index.
This was a project that's actually had a lot of uptake and that has been very successful. It's called Index-Based Livestock Insurance, ILRI. And what it is a project that, so instead of traditional insurance pays out when you suffer a loss. Let's say you've got housing insurance in your house, there's a flood and you lose your house. So you've suffered a loss, and now you can go in and petition and get your reimbursement, hopefully, from the insurance company. Index-based livestock insurance provides payout before you suffer a loss, and based on certain data that are mutually agreed upon beforehand. So, for example, if the region where you're a small-scale farmer or herder, for example, you buy the insurance for a relatively modest sum, and then let's say there's a long-term drought. You don't wait until your animals have all died before you get payment. Let's say I'm plucking this number from random because I don't actually know but let's say it goes 100 days without rain. At that point, you'll automatically get a payment, whether your livestock are still alive or they're dead, but hopefully they're still alive. And at that point, you'll be able to buy the resources you need to keep your animals alive. Because sometimes people just need a little extra bit to get over this to prevent a sort of disastrous loss. And so it prevents people from just saying, I don't care if the animal's not getting reimbursed. People still have a sort of a potential of saving their animals. And it also pays out before you suffer a loss so that you're able to keep your animals alive should something happen.
That's good. And is this available in different African countries?
It's available in Kenya and Ethiopia now, and we're sort of convening people from all over the IGAD countries, the 8 countries of East Africa and the Horn of Africa recently, and we're trying to sort of spread this idea more broadly.
And
hopefully it would be very successful.
And hopefully you have it in Nigeria, West Africa.
Yeah. Hopefully with your help we can propagate it there.
That'll be good. That's a promise. Okay, so I wanted to talk more about we hear a lot of Westerners, they talk about the anti-livestock activists. They talk about the West, about how we're eating a lot of meat, but then people forget about Africa as well. So can you talk more on that issue and how were we eating a lot of meat?
So, there are a lot of genuine, legitimate concerns about meat consumption, and maybe specifically beef.
Okay.
There was always a certain concern among a small group in the West about, animal cruelty and the way industrial farms in the West treat their animals. But those concerns have been magnified recently for 2 reasons. First, there's some concern about overconsumption of meat and the effect that it might have on people's health. And second, there's concern that all of these animals, and people think it's the cow farts, but it's actually the cow burps that are the main source of the problem. They produce a lot of methane gas and other greenhouse gas emissions that are seen as a major contributor significant contributor to global warming. And so there's been a sort of a growing anti-livestock movement in the West, which may be appropriate. But what happens is that the activists tend to forget that in the rest of the world, the problem is that people aren't getting enough meat, that they're not getting enough protein, that millions, not just tens, but hundreds of millions of people depend on livestock for their livelihood. And we can't just say, let's put an end to livestock, or let's all eat lab-based meat, because it would be a disaster.
So a lot of people don't know this, but 40% of livestock contributes to agricultural GDP. And that's a huge amount. And we have a lot of research or a lot of funding that goes into agriculture crop research. But what about the livestock research? How does this anti-livestock activity affect that?
So our scientists have this experience routinely where they go to conferences and people say, we're sort of reluctant to get into the livestock assistance. But livestock contributes 40%, as you said, of agricultural GDP on average, throughout the developing world. In different countries, it can vary tremendously. In some countries, it's 10 or 15, 20%. In other countries, like Mongolia, I think it's like 70 or 80%. And yet, if you look at the official development assistance numbers, you see that not a lot goes to agriculture, but only a tiny fraction, 2.5%, goes to livestock. Even though livestock is contributing 40% to the totality of people's well-being in developing countries, it still receives just a tiny sliver of the assistance that goes to agriculture. So that's one of the ways that the anti-livestock agenda disproportionately affects in a negative way the well-being of people in the developing world.
And what is ILRI doing to address these challenges that we have?
The problem that is identified, that is real, and we're not contesting that there are real, serious, legitimate issues. What we're trying to say is, first of all, remember that the rest of the world exists. So that's first of all. And then second of all, we're just sort of outlining some of the various goods that livestock can do for people in the developing world. Livestock isn't seen as a feminist issue, but it should be. Because women, as you probably know, in many developing world contexts, they're not seen as owners of the land. The land sort of belongs to the man, and the descent sort of goes through males. I mean, that's not true, obviously. But one of the ways that women can get some independent income is via livestock. First, they control small animals like chickens and goats and sheep, and and of course milk. So this is one of their few independent sources of income, and one of their few independent property claims. And of course, we know that women tend to use income for the good of the family.
Yes.
They pay for the school fees. In fact, we have one of our most senior researchers, this guy from Togo. He grew up in a village 200 kilometers north of Lomé. And his mother sold chickens, in the village market. And now his daughter, this scientist's daughter, is clerking for the U.S. Supreme Court. So in 2 generations, they've gone from a woman selling chickens in a village market to being on the U.S. Supreme Court. It's an extraordinary transformation.
So is ILRI doing anything to empower women?
We're developing what's called a Women's Empowerment Index. So imagine that you're trying to figure out which of 50 different projects. You're assessing different projects to see which ones are helping women the most in the developing world regarding livestock and agriculture. Well, if you don't have some common framework to assess how well the projects are doing, it's very hard to compare. It's as if imagine that each scientist was, boiling water, but they each had their own temperature gauge. And so there was no common index, no way of comparing, the different temperatures. It would be a mess. You would say, well, it boiled when it got really hot. So by developing this uniform index, we can help researchers determine which projects are most beneficial to women.
I also want to find out how is ILRI using technology to communicate data with pastoralists or just mixed-use smallholder farmers.
We have a thing called the African Dairy Genetics Project. And this project, let me back up. To understand how to improve animals' productivity, you need a large data set. It's not enough to just say, oh, look, we produced an animal that you have to have thousands and thousands of data points to assess, how they do in different temperature zones, what they do with different feeds, how well they live, how much they produce over the course of a season or over the course of a lifetime. And it's very hard to get all of that data here in Africa. Why? Because imagine you're in Texas. Well, one Texas farmer might have 100,000 head of cattle, or 50. In Africa, everyone has like 5 or 6 or 10 cattle. So how do you get that data? What we've done is we've set up a system where farmers provide information on a daily or semi-weekly basis to a sort of a central data center. And then in return, they routinely receive information about how to care for their animals, when their next vaccine shots are due, or how to deal with, if the cows are having problems with their udders or something, they receive information in return. So it's this mutual exchange via cell phone, and it's giving the scientists the data they need, the large-scale data they need, in order to figure out how to develop improved breeds.
One of the current issues we have in Nigeria right now is the Edmund farmers crisis. I'm sure you're aware about that. And I know ILRI has worked on a project securing rangelands and settling conflicts through village land use in planning in Tanzania. Can you talk about what other countries and countries like Nigeria could learn from that?
What is happening in Nigeria and northern Nigeria and what's happening in the Sahel is extremely complex, and there are a dozen different factors in play, right? But one of the things we're doing in Tanzania is we're developing land usage agreements. We're convening farmers with pastoralists And we're saying, okay, first of all, here's a big, huge map. And let's figure out, when and where pastoralists can bring their cattle, and when and who has rights to this water hole during which season. And by reaching an agreement, on the other hand, so we're doing that. On the other hand, I know in Nigeria and the Sahel there are a dozen other factors at play, from religious conflicts to economic vested interests, but this is one piece of the puzzle that might be helpful. Livestock is a vital component of people's livelihoods and nutrition in the developing world, and we should be doing more to support it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.